My story occurred when I was house sitting a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. The house is surrounded by acres of land, and the nearest town is 4 miles away. I was responsible for looking after the livestock and the family pets. Now, everything was smooth sailing in the day, but nighttime, well, the house took on a different vibe, and I didn't always feel safe, especially as the house has a reputation for being haunted. Third night in, and I am watching some late night movie. It's probably about 11:30 p.m. and the doorbell suddenly rings. I have a clear view of the driveway and the entry porch, and I didn't hear a car pull up or see anyone walk past. I check the peephole and nobody is outside. I think it's a little weird, but put it down to overtiredness. Then it happens 3 more times in the space of 10 minutes. I check the CCTV and there is absolutely nobody outside that can be seen. The doorbell actually rings as I am looking at the cameras, but there is definitely nobody outside. I feel a mix of fear and confusion and lock myself in the master bedroom for the remainder of the night. The fourth night arrives and I am still feeling unsettled, so I have a few glasses of wine. I even start to watch a ghost hunter type show. The show is really good and I watch a few more episodes before deciding to head to bed. As soon as I turn the TV off, I can hear the sound of running water. I slowly walk into the bathroom and the shower is on full flow. I haven't used the shower in the main bathroom, so I definitely hadn't forgotten to switch it off. I am puzzled, if not scared, but I try and put it to the back of my mind. Thankfully, it's time to return home the next day and tell my friends about the doorbell and shower. There were a few shifts where I got sent to a small town hospital. They built a second building in the early 2000s and then moved from the old building to the new one, basically abandoning the old building. The old building was built somewhere in the mid-1900s. Basically, I was there to help with access control because they'd had some problems at the time. Part of doing this was checking over the old building for break-ins. The old building is creepy enough for being like a 1950s hospital, but just abandoned. Basically, empty. Nothing really in that wing except for some storage things that probably don't even get remembered, let alone accessed. To enter this portion of the building, you have to go through the new building's basement, through a tunnel, down through an old mental health psych wing, up a set of stairs, and then you're in the abandoned part. It's maybe a 10-minute walk to get in, but you're alone. For someone like me, it's a little unnerving to walk through with weird objects in storage, casting weird shadows, or old building creaks, radiator noise, rodents, whatever else. It's also kind of a large portion of building, and backup could be anywhere from minutes to hours away. No one really enters the basement during the nights, and much less goes to the abandoned part, except for us. It's probably where you would expect dusty old graffiti in some places. I remember kicking a piece of wood down a hallway, and when I came back the next night, it was exactly where I had originally kicked it from. I figured at the time it was maybe being used as a door jamb or something. Boy, I was wrong. A month or so after those 2 nights, I was talking to my supervisor. She told me that the locals of that area claim that portion of the building is haunted. The supervisor then went on to explain how the locals will move that piece of wood to a random place in the abandoned wing every time they are there, and the next day it will be back where it came from, without fail, despite no one going into that building. Now, whenever dispatch has anything for that hospital, I avoid it like the plague and check exteriors for any signs of break-ins, nuisance, transients, or whatever. I'm a certified nursing assistant and I worked in this very old building a while back. Obviously, this being a nursing home, lots of people died in the building. A lot of my residents talk about people standing in doorways and going in and out of their rooms throughout the night. I, for one, haven't seen any of these apparitions myself, but I do get a sense that something is amiss when we start turning out the lights for the night. Every time I come into work for the evening, the air it feels heavier and colder than it should, enough to make me cough. Some of the bedridden residents talk during the night too, as if talking to the dark. Some have said it's enough to make them scream and act out. One story in particular that worries me when I have to work the men's Alzheimer's unit is about the screaming lady. The story with the men's unit is that it was once integrated, as in both men and women were kept there. This was back in the 80s and 90s. There is this one resident, we'll call him King. King never comes out of his room, not even to shower or ask questions about his medication. He's been there longer than the rest. The older nurses told me that one night, King came out of his room and told them that there was a lady at the door and she needed to be let in. He told them she was crying and screaming for him to open the door. Well, of course the nurses chalked it up to his dementia and sweetly showed him back to his room. After that, they returned to their posts and resumed with their charting. It was at that moment, when everything was quiet again, that the nurses heard 3 swift pounds on the door at the end of the dark corridor. They hesitantly went to check it out and saw nothing but rain through the dirty glass. This door led outside, by the way. Back then, it was locked by key. Now, it has a keypad. More recently, however, a news story has been circulating among the staff about the screaming lady. By what happened this time has led me to believe that she has become angry because she wasn't let inside. One of my charge nurses, we'll call him Cobb, had an experience in that unit while I was working there. Cobb took the night shift one night and started hearing noises while working on the computer. They were coming from the end of the hall. So he got up and peered down the hall into the dark and saw someone or something going in and out of the rooms. He described it as a shadow in the shape of a person with long hair. He watched for a minute as it went into one room after another, gradually making its way up the hall. He finally went to look when the thing was in one of the rooms closer to the nurse's station that was in the lobby. He used the flashlight on his phone to scan the room and noticed the bathroom light was on. He shined the light toward the bed where the room's occupant was. Then he opened the door of the dimly lit bathroom to find nobody there. So he brushed it off and turned out the bathroom light. The moment the light shut off, he swore he heard the most high-pitched noise, as if it were a scream of someone directly behind him. The scream was followed by a sudden sharp pain running down the back of his neck. He bolted out of there, and the scream followed until he was back at the nurse's station. He said it must have been inside his head because the hall was quiet after that, as if nothing had happened. I was working under him one afternoon, and as he was telling me the story, one of the more coherent residents saunters over and says he had the exact same thing happen to him a couple of nights back. The shadow, the scream, and the sudden neck pain. There are many more horror stories from that place, but this one seems to stick with me the most. I worked the closing shift alone at a gas station during college. Not the best place to have a teenage girl alone all night, looking back on it, especially since we were the first gas station off the interstate exit. One night, my little sister stopped in to visit. She was probably 17 at the time. As we stood there talking, we noticed four raggedy, dirty-looking men get out of this really beat-up car and start milling around the parking lot. One of them walked in and looked at me and my sister quickly, then looked away and acted very interested in the lottery machine that was beside the door. He stood at the machine for a few seconds, fidgeting around, then walked out. He stood right beside the newspaper dispenser just outside our door, and you could periodically see him gesturing to the other three men who had gotten back into the car and kept moving it around the lot. We obviously noticed this strange behavior and were pretty nervous. She ended up staying with me for over an hour until we thought they had left and had been gone for a while. I walked to the door with her as she walked out and watched her get into her car. As soon as she put her car in reverse, I saw headlights come on from a dark corner of the parking lot that you couldn't see from inside the store. Turned out, they had never left. They'd pulled out and immediately swung into a little gravel turn-in beside the store and pulled right back in, completely unseen, and backed into an out-of-the-way parking spot and turned out all their lights. As my sister's car pulled up to the highway to turn out of the parking lot, they pulled up right behind her and turned onto the road when she did. That was it. I called the police and had them waiting at my sister's apartment when she arrived. This was before cell phones were common. It was around 2004, so I couldn't call and warn her personally. Fortunately, nothing happened to her, but when I talked to her again, she told me that she'd noticed someone behind her the whole drive home, but again, no cell phone. It makes me sick to think about what could have happened had I not walked to the door with her that night and noticed the car hiding in the shadows.